Chapter 10. A plot discovered. The conversation between Gervase and his fellow slave was interrupted by the arrival at the side of the quay of a party of knights. Silence instantly fell upon the slaves, all straightened themselves up to the oars, and prepared for a start. Among the knights who took their places on the poop, Gervase saw with amusement his friend Ralph. He had no fear of a recognition, for the darkly stained skin and the black hair had so completely altered him that when he had looked at himself in a mirror, after the application of the dye, he was surprised to find that he would not have known it to be his own face. Ralph was in command of the party, which consisted of young knights who had but recently arrived at Rhodes, and as it was the first time he had been appointed as instructor, Gervase saw that he was greatly pleased at what he rightly regarded as promotion. The galley at once pushed off from the wharf and rowed out of the port. The work was hard, but as the slaves were not pressed to any extraordinary exertions, Gervase did not find it excessive. He congratulated himself, however, that the stain was, as he had been assured, indelible, save by time, for after a few minutes' exercise he was bathed in perspiration. As the galley had been taken out only that instruction might be given to the young knights, the work was frequently broken. Sometimes they went ahead at full speed for a few hundred yards, as if to chase an adversary, then they would swerve aside, the slaves on one side rowing, while those on the other backed, so as to make a rapid turn. Then she lay for a minute or two immovable, and then backed water, or turned to avoid the attack of an imaginary foe. Then for an hour she lay quiet, while the knights, divesting themselves of their mantles and armor, worked one of the guns on the poop, aiming at a floating barrel moored for the purpose a mile out at sea. At 11 o'clock they returned to the port. Bread and water were served out to the slaves, and they were then permitted to lie down and sleep, the galley being moored under the shadow of the wall. At 4 o'clock another party of knights came down, and the work was similar to that which had been performed in the morning. At 7 o'clock the slaves were taken back to their barracks. "Well, what do you think of your work?" one of the slaves asked Gervase, as they ate their evening meal. "It would not be so bad if it was all like that." "No. But I can tell you that when you have to row from sunrise to sunset, with perhaps but 1 or 2 pauses for a few minutes, it is a different thing altogether, especially if the galley is carrying despatches, and speed is necessary. Then you get so worn out and exhausted that you can scarce move an oar through the water, until you are wakened up by a smart as if a red-hot iron had been laid across your shoulders. It is terrible work then. The whip cracks every minute across someone's back, you are blinded by exhaustion and rage, and you feel that you would give the world if you could but burst your chain, rush on your taskmasters, and strike, if only one blow, before you are killed. It must be terrible, Gervase said. And do you never get loose, and fall upon them? The man shook his head. The chains are too strong, and the watch too vigilant, he said. Since I came here I have heard tales of crews having freed themselves in the night, and fallen upon the Christians, but for my part one do not believe in them. I have thought, as I suppose every one of us has thought, how such a thing could be done, but as far as I know no one has hit on a plan yet. Now and then men have managed to become possessed of a file, and have, by long and patient work, sawn through a chain, and have, when a galley has been lying near our own shore, sprung overboard and escaped. But for every attempt that succeeds there must be 20 failures, for the chains are frequently examined, and woe be to the man who is found to have been tampering with his. But as to a whole gang getting free at once, it is altogether impossible, unless the key of the padlocks could be stolen from an overseer or the man bribed into aiding us. And that, I suppose, is impossible. Gervase said. Certainly, impossible for us who have no money to bribe them with, but easy enough if anyone outside, with ample means, were to set about it. These overseers are, many of them, sons of Turkish mothers, and have no sympathy, save that caused by interest, with one parent more than another. Of course, they are brought up Christians, and taught to hold Muslims in abhorrence, but I think many of them, if they had their free choice, would cross to the mainland. Here they have no chance of ever being aught but what they are, overseers of slaves, or small prison officials. They are despised by these haughty knights, and hated by us, while were they to reach the mainland and adopt their mother's religion, everything would be open to them. All followers of the Prophet have an equal chance, and one may be a soldier today, a bey tomorrow, and a pasha a year hence, if he be brave, or astute, or capable in any way beyond his fellows. Men like these warders would be sure to make their way. They cannot have gathered much during their service, therefore the offer of a large sum of money would find plenty among them eager to earn it. But, you see, they are but the inferiors. On our voyages on board the galley, the knights inspect our fetters twice a day, and the keys are kept in the commander's cabin. For an hour or two, when we are not on a long passage, the padlocks are unfastened, in order that we may jump over and bathe, and exercise our limbs, but at this time the knights are always on guard, and as we are without arms, we are altogether powerless. It is the same thing here. The senior warders, who all belong to the order, although of an inferior grade, come round, as you have seen, to examine our fetters, and themselves lock and bar the doors. If one or two of these could be corrupted, escape would be easy enough. But is it impossible to do this? Jervis asked eagerly. My father has money, and would I know be ready, if I could communicate with him, to pay a handsome sum, if sure that it would result in my obtaining my freedom? The man nodded significantly. There may be other means of doing it, he said. Perhaps it will not be long before you hear of it. You seem a stout fellow, and full of spirit, but as yet, anything that may be going on is known but to a few, and will go no further until the time comes that all may be told. I think not so badly of men of our faith as to believe that any one would betray the secret for the sake of obtaining his own freedom, and a big reward, but secrets, when known by many, are apt to leak out. A muttered word or two in sleep, or the ravings of one down with fever, might afford ground for suspicion, and torture would soon do the rest. I myself know nothing of the secret, but I do know that there is something going on which, if successful, will give us our freedom. I am content to know no more until the time comes, but there are few, save those engaged in the matter, that know as much as this, and you can see that it is better it should be so. Look at that man opposite. He has been here 15 years, he seldom speaks, he does his work, but it is as a brute beast. Despair has well nigh turned him into one. Think you that if such a man as that were to know that there is hope, he would not be so changed that even the dullest would observe it? I see you are a brisk young fellow, and I say to you, keep up your courage. The time is nearer than you think when you will be free from these accursed shackles. Each morning, as he went out to work with his gang, Jervis saw the servant from the auberge standing near, but he made no sign. He was satisfied that his suspicions had been justified, and that he was not leading this life in vain, but he thought it better to wait until the week passed, and he was taken away to have his colour renewed, than to make a sign that might possibly rouse the suspicions of his comrades. On the 8th morning, when the door of the room was unlocked, the overseer said, "Number 36, you will remain here. You are wanted for other work." After the gang had left the prison, the overseer returned. "I am to take you up to the English auberge. The knight who handed you over to me when you landed told me that you might be wanted as a servitor, and as it is he who has sent down, it may be that a vacancy has occurred. If so, you are in luck, for the servitors have a vastly better time of it than the galley slaves, and the English auberge has the best reputation in that respect. Come along with me." The English auberge was one of the most handsome of the buildings standing in the great street of the Knights. Its architecture was Gothic in its character, and, although the Langue was one of the smallest of those represented at Rhodes, it vied with any of them in the splendour of its appointments. Sir John Boswell was standing in the interior courtyard. "Wait here for a few minutes," he said to the overseer. "The bailiff will himself question the slave as to his accomplishments, but I fancy he will not be considered of sufficient age for the post that is vacant. However, if this should not be so, I shall no doubt find a post to fit him ere long, for he seems a smart young fellow, and, what is better, a willing one, and bears himself well under his misfortunes." Then he motioned to Jervis to follow him to the bailiff's apartments. "Well, Sir Jervis," Sir John Kendall exclaimed, as the door closed behind him, "have you found aught to justify this cruel penance you have undertaken?" "As to the penance, Sir John, it has been nothing unsupportable. The exercise is hard enough, but none too hard for one in good health and strength, and, save for the filth of the chamber in which we are shut up at night, and the foul state of the rushes on which we lie, I should have naught to complain of. No, I have as yet heard nothing of a shorty, and yet enough to show me that my suspicions were justified, and that there is a plot of some sort on foot," and he related to the two knights the conversation he had had with the galley slave. "By St. George," the bailiff said, "you have indeed been justified in your surmises, and I am glad that I attached sufficient importance to your suspicions to let you undertake this strange enterprise. What think you, Sir John Boswell?" I think with you that Sir Gervais has fully the 2 guards at the outside gates must, of course, be killed. Duplicates of the keys have been made, and will be hidden in a spot known to some of our party, close to the gate. Thus we have but to issue out and rush down, in a body, to the port. I and another are to take the arms of our guard, and 2 others are told off in each room to do the same. That will give us 60 armed men. We shall make very short work of the guards at the gate leading into the port. Then 20 of us are to run along the mole to Fort St. Nicholas, 20 to the Tower of St. Michael, and 20 to that of St. John. There will be, at the most, but 3 or 4 men keeping watch at each fort, and thus we shall have in our possession the 3 forts commanding the entrance to the harbour. There are, as you know, 6 galleys manned by crews from our prison there. The crew of each galley will embark upon it, and man the oars, the rest will divide themselves among the galleys. Before starting, we shall seize and set fire to all other galleys and ships in the port. The gangs in 4 of the rooms have been told off specially for this duty. Before firing them, they are to take out such provisions as they may find, and transport them to the galleys. We who take the forts are provided with hammers and long nails, to drive down the vent holes of the cannon. When we have done this, we are to wait until one of the galleys fetches us off. 10 minutes should be ample time for all there is to be done, and even if the alarm is given at once, we shall be away long before the knights can be aroused from sleep, buckle on their armor, and get down to the port. Exclamations of delight and approbation burst from his hearers. Then it is only we of this prison who are in the plot, one said. Yes. In the first place, it would have been too dangerous to attempt to free all. In the second, the galleys would not carry them. We shall be closely packed as it is, for there are over 1,000 here. I hear that there was a talk of freeing all, and that we, instead of embarking at first, should make for the other prisons, burst open the doors, and rescue the others, but by the time we could do so the knights would be all in arms, and our enterprise would fail altogether, for as but a small proportion of us can obtain weapons, we could not hope to overcome them. Were it not for the strong wall that separates their quarter from the town, we might make straight for their houses and slay them before the alarm could be given. As it is, that would be impossible, and therefore the plan will be carried out as I have told you. The loss of all their galleys and of over 1,000 slaves will be a heavy blow for them. Great pains have been taken to prevent confusion when we reach the port. The men in each room have been instructed as to the galleys on which they are to embark. As for you, you know precisely what is to be done. You will simply take your places, and then wait until all are on board. No galley is to push out from the wharf until the last man of those employed in burning the ships has returned, with the provisions found in them. Then the order will be given by the man who has arranged all this, and the 6 galleys will put out together. One is to row to each of the forts to carry off the party that will have been engaged in silencing its cannon. Our galley is to row to St. Nicholas, and take off the 20 men I shall lead there. There is no possibility of failure. Everything has, you see, been arranged. One of the overseers who is in the plot walked by my side as we returned from the port, and gave me the instructions, and all the others will have been told in the same way, or else by the guards in charge of them. The gang now broke up into little groups, talking excitedly over the unlooked-for news, and exulting over the speedy advent of liberty. Gervais strolled carelessly to the window, and dropped out the white strip of stuff. It was now quite dark, and there was no fear of anyone observing the movement. Then he joined the others. After an hour and a half had passed he heard footsteps approaching the door. There was a pause, then the outside bars were taken down, and a key turned in the lock. A deep silence fell on the slaves. Then a voice called, "Number 36. "What is it?" replied Gervais, without raising himself from his seat on the bedding. "I have done my share of work today, and earned my night's sleep. It is a knight from the English auberge. He has come to fetch you. It seems that you are to go there as a servitor." "What a cursed fortune," Gervais muttered, in Turkish, "just when a road to freedom is open. I have a good mind to say I am ill, and cannot go till the morning." "No, no," one of the others exclaimed. "They would only drag you out, and when they saw that there was naught the matter with you, would suspect that there must be some reason why you did not want to go, when, as everyone knows, the position of the servitors is in every way preferable to ours. Now then, why are you delaying?" a voice said sharply, and a warder entered with a lighted torch. "Get up, you lazy hound. It will be worse for you if I have to speak again." "I am coming," Jervis grumbled. "I was just asleep." He rose, as if reluctantly, and went forward. The warder gave him an angry push, followed him out, and locked and barred the door after him. "I suppose this is the right man?" Sir John Boswell said. "This is number 36, Sir Knight, the same who was taken over to your auberge the other day," and he held the light close to Jervis' face. "Yes, that is the man." "Follow me," he added, in Turkish. The gate of the courtyard was unbarred, and they passed out unquestioned. Sir John strolled on ahead. Jervis followed him a pace or two behind. Not until they had passed through the gate of the castle did Sir John turn. "I have not spoken to you," he said, "as we may have been watched. Keep your news until we reach the auberge." Upon entering it they went up at once to Sir John Kendall's apartments. "Well, Sir Jervis, the strip of cotton was brought to us safely. What is your news?" "It is very serious, Sir John, and I have been in terrible anxiety since I dropped it out, lest it should not come to hand in time. As it is, you have till midnight to make your preparations." He then repeated the statement made by the galley slave. "By my faith," Sir John Kendall exclaimed, "this is a pretty plot indeed. And had it succeeded, as it certainly would have done but for your vigilance, it would have been a heavy blow to us. The burning of all our galleys would have crippled us sorely, and the loss of over 1,000 slaves would have been a serious one indeed, when we so urgently require them for completing our defences. Get rid of those clothes at once, Sir Jervis, and don your own. We must go straight to the Grand Master. You will find your clothes and armour in the next room. I had them taken there as soon as your token was brought me." In a few minutes Jervis returned in his usual attire, and with his armour buckled on. The two knights were already in their coats of mail, and leaving the auberge they went to the Grand Master's palace. A servitor had already been sent to Dielbusen to inform him that they were coming, and he advanced to meet them as they entered. "Welcome, Sir Jervis," he said. "Whether your news be good or bad, whether you have found that it is a general rising of the slaves that is intended, or a plot by which a handful of slaves may seize a boat and escape, the gratitude of the order is no less due to you for the hardships and humiliations you have undergone on its behalf. It concerns but one prison, that of St. Pelagius. The largest of them, the Grand Master put in. The whole of the slaves there are to be liberated at 12 o'clock tonight, are to seize the 3 water towers and to spike the guns, to burn all the shipping in the harbour, to make off with 6 galleys, and destroy the rest." "By St. John!" Dielbusen exclaimed, "this is indeed a serious matter. But tell me all about it. There must be treachery indeed at work for such a scheme to be carried out." Jervis now told him all the details he had learned. "So 2 of the order, though but of the inferior grade, are in the plot," the Grand Master said, "and several of the overseers. One of the villains is, of course, the man you saw this Greek talking with. We must get hold of the other if we can. As to the slaves, now that we have warning, there is an end of the matter, though without such warning they would surely have succeeded, for the plans are well laid, and they would have been at sea before we could have gathered in any force at the port. If it were not that it would cost the lives of many of the warders and of the prison guards, I should say we ought to take post outside the gate, for we should then catch the traitors who are to accompany them. As it is, we must be beforehand with them. 100 men will be more than ample for our purpose. Do you take 50 of your knights, Sir John Kendall, and I will draw 50 of those of Oven. At 11 o'clock we will meet at the gate leading down into the town, and will march to the private entrance of the governor's house. I will go in first with a few of you, tell him what we have discovered, and post guards to prevent anyone from leaving his house. Then, having admitted the others, we will go quietly out and place a party at each door of the overseer's house, with orders to seize any who may come out. The rest, in small parties, will then go round the prison, and, entering each room, show the slaves that their plot has been discovered. This we must do to save the lives of the guards who may be faithful to their trust. As to the higher officials engaged in the affair, we must obtain their names from the overseers or slaves. It is not likely that the 2 traitors will quit their houses, as they will leave the matter in the hands of the overseers, who, as you say, intend to first open the doors, and then to accompany the slaves in their escape. Do not warn the knights until it is nearly time to start, Sir John. The less stir made the better, for no one can say whether they may not have suborned some of the servitors to send instant news of any unusual movements in any of the Imbark. Chapter 11 In Command of a Galley. William Neve, the governor of the prison, looked astonished indeed when, upon his opening the door, the Grand Master and the bailiff of the English Lung, with the 12 knights behind them, entered. He had been puzzled when, for days before, he had received an order from the Grand Master that Ahmet, a servitor in the auberge of the English Lung, should be permitted to pass the night in his house, with authority to move freely and without question, at any hour, in the courtyard of the gaol, and to depart at any hour, secretly and without observation, by the private gate. Still more had he been surprised when he received the message that the Grand Master would pay him a secret visit at 11 o'clock at night. "Let no word be spoken until we are in your apartments," D'Aubusson said in a low voice, as he entered. "But first lead 4 of these knights and post them so that none can enter the gaol from the house. If there are more than 4 doors or windows on that side, you must post a larger number. It is imperative that there shall be no communication whatever between your servants and the gaol." As soon as this was done, the rest of the party were taken to the governor's rooms. "I can now explain to you all," the Grand Master said, "the reason of our presence here. I have learned that at 12 tonight there will be a general rising of the slaves in this prison, and that, aided by treachery, they will free themselves from their fetters, overpower and slay such of the guards in their rooms as have not been bribed, throw open the gates, make their way down to the port, burn all the shipping there, and make off in the 6 galleys manned by them, having first overpowered the sentries in the 3 forts commanding the entrance and spiked the guns." Exclamations of astonishment burst from the knights, who now, for the first time, learnt the reason of their being called out. The governor listened with an expression of stupefaction. "With all deference to your highness," he said hesitatingly, "it seems to me that some one must have been deceiving you with this tale. It is altogether incredible that such a plot should have been hatched without a whisper of the matter coming to my ears. It could only be possible were there, not one but many, traitors among the officials. If this is so, then indeed am I a dull ass, and unfit for my duty here, of which I shall pray you to relieve me, and to order such punishment as the council may deem just to be allotted to me for having so signally been hoodwinked." "My news is sure," the Grand Master said, "but I deem not that you are in any way to blame in the matter. The plot has been matured, not as a consequence of any laxity of discipline in the prison, but from deliberate treachery, against which no mortal being can guard. The traitors are 2 of the officials who, being members of the order, none would suspect of connivance in such a deed. With them are several, I know not how many, under-officials, warders, and guards. All these have been bribed by an emissary from Constantinople, now in the town, and who is doubtless furnished with large means. It is well, indeed, for the order, that this terrible act of treachery has been discovered in time to prevent the plot from coming to a head, for the loss of all our galleys, to say nothing of the disgrace of having been thus bearded by slaves, would be a very heavy blow to it. Now that the house is safely guarded, William Neve, you can admit the rest of the knights, who are waiting outside. Then you will, in the first place, conduct a party, and post them so that they may arrest, as they come out to perform their share of the work, all officials, warders, and guards, of whatever rank. When you have posted knights to carry out this, and I need not say that the operation must be performed as silently as possible, for it is above all things necessary that the men concerned shall have no suspicion that their plot has been discovered, you will conduct other parties to the various rooms occupied by the slaves. The guards on duty inside will be made prisoners. The doors will then be locked and barred as before. The appearance of the knights and the arrest of the guards will be sufficient to show the slaves that their plot has been discovered, and there will be no fear of their making any attempt to carry it into execution. I will myself post the main body of the knights in the courtyard. The arrest of the guards is to be carried out at once, as all those not concerned in the plot would be killed when the hour comes for the rising. Therefore this part of the business must be carried out immediately. I should not, however, lead the guards away to a cell, for the less tramping of feet the better. Therefore I shall place 2 knights in each room, and beg them to remain inside in charge until the traitors outside are secured." The knights outside were now marched up. The Grand Master ordered half those of Oven to go round to the main gate, which would be opened for them by the governor. They were to enter quietly, and remain in a body close to it until they received further orders. Sir John Kendall told off the rest of the knights to the various duties of watching the houses occupied by the officials and warders, and of entering the prison rooms and remaining in them on guard. The governor, with his private servants, bearing a supply of torches, was to lead them to the various cells and unlock the doors. The knights were enjoined to move as noiselessly as possible and to avoid all clashing of arms against armor. The governor produced a number of cloths intended to be served out to the slaves. Strips of these were cut off and wrapped round the feet of the English knights, so as to deaden the sound of their boots on the stone pavement. Then, accompanied by the Grand Master and Sir John Kendall, he went the round of the cells. In some of these the slaves were found standing up in an attitude of eager expectation, which, as the door opened, and the light of the torches showed a party of knights, changed into one of terror and consternation. Scarce a word was spoken. The guard was ordered to lay down his arms and to take one of the torches. 2 knights placed themselves, one on each side of him, with drawn swords. The door was again locked and barred, and the party proceeded to the next cell. In less than a quarter of an hour this part of the work was finished, and Audiobook, Sir John Kendall, and the governor then took up their station with a party of knights who, concealed behind a buttress, were watching the doors of the officials' houses. 10 minutes later one of these doors was heard to open, and 5 dark figures came noiselessly out. They were allowed to go a short distance in order to see if any others followed, but as no others came out, the governor stepped forward. "Whither are you going, at this time of night?" he asked. There was a momentary pause, a few hasty words were exchanged, then the 5 men rushed towards him with bared swords or knives, but before they reached him the knights poured out from their hiding place. "We are betrayed," one of the men shouted in Turkish. "Fight to the last. Better be killed than tortured and executed." With a yell of fury and despair, they rushed upon the knights. So desperate was their attack that the latter were forced to use their swords, which indeed, burning with rage at the treachery of these men, they were not backward in doing, and in less than a minute the 5 traitors lay, with cloven heads, dead on the pavement. "It is as well so," Audiobook said, looking sternly down upon them, "perhaps better so, since it has saved us the scandal of their trial. We might have learned more from them, but we have learnt enough, since, doubtless, they have no accomplices among the warders, or they would have been with them. Now we will deal with the arch-traitors. There is no need for further concealment, the noise of this fray will assuredly have been heard by them, for they will be listening for the sounds that would tell them the slaves had been liberated." Followed by the knights, he went to the door of the house occupied by the overseers, all of whom were members of the lower branch of the order. It was indeed evident that an alarm had been given there, for lights appeared at the windows. As they opened the door and entered the hall, several half-dressed men rushed down the stairs with drawn swords, 2 of them carrying torches in their left hands. As the light fell upon the figures of the Grand Master and the knights, they paused in astonishment. "There is treachery at work in the prison," Audiobook said quietly. "I pray you to collect your comrades and to assemble here at once." In a minute or two some 20 officials were gathered in the hall. "Are all here?" Audiobook asked the governor. The latter counted the men. "There are 2 short," he said, "Pietro Romano and Carl Schumann. They occupy the same room. Go and fetch them down, for a view." The 4 men nearest to the stairs at once went up with 2 torches. They returned in a minute. "The door is fastened on the inside, and we can obtain no response." "Fetch an axe and break it in," the Grand Master ordered. "Sir John Boswell, do you, with some other knights, take post without. They may attempt to escape by the window, though, as we hold the gates, it would avail them little. Sir Gervase Tresham, do you follow us?" Gervase, who had been placed with the party watching the house, followed the Grand Master and governor upstairs. A few blows with an axe splintered the door, its fastenings gave way, and they entered the room. The window was open, and 2 figures lay prostrate on the ground near it. "I half expected this," the Grand Master said. They were listening there. The conflict in the yard told them that the plot had been discovered, and as they saw us approaching the house, they dared not meet the punishment of their crimes, and have fallen by their own daggers. Put a torch close to their faces. "Sir Gervase, do you recognize in either of these men the official you saw in conversation with the Greek?" Gervase stepped forward and examined the men's faces. "This is the man," he said, pointing to one of them. "I marked him so closely that I cannot be mistaken." "That is Pietro Romano," the governor said. "He was an able officer, but discontented with his position and given to quarreling with his comrades. have a hole dug and bury them in the prison, Audiobook said. They have been false to their vows, and false to their religion. They have chosen their own mode of death, let them be buried like dogs, as they are. But a loud shout rose from the assembled knights, for upon the return of the party who had been away, the rest of those at the auberge had hastily robed themselves and descended to the hall to gather the news. When the shout had died away, and the wine cups were emptied, Gervase, who was sitting on Sir John Kendall's right hand, would gladly have retained his seat, but the bailiff told him that he must say a few words, and after standing in embarrassed silence for a minute he said, "Sir John Kendall, and brother knights, I can only say that I am very sensible of the kindness with which you have been pleased to regard what seems to me after all to have been a very ordinary affair. I saw a man, whom I knew to be a stranger in the island, speaking surreptitiously to a slave, and afterwards saw him conversing with a prison officer. That naturally struck me as curious, and I followed the officer to see to which prison he belonged. Anyone would have thought, as I did, that such a thing was strange, if not suspicious, and the only way to find out whether there was anything in it was to mix with the slaves. As I spoke Turkish well enough to do so, I asked Sir John Kendall's permission to disguise myself. He gave me every assistance, and I shared their lot for a fortnight. There was no very great hardship in that, certainly nothing to merit the praise that Sir John Kendall has been kind enough to bestow on me. Nevertheless, I am very glad to have gained your good opinion and very grateful to him and to you for drinking to my health." Then he sat down abruptly. Sir John Kendall now rose, and the knights, following his example, betook themselves to their dormitories. The next morning notices were sent by the Grand Master to the bailiffs of the auberges, and the Knights of the Grand Cross who happened to be in the island, to assemble in council. Messages were also sent to Gervase, requesting him to repair at the same hour to the palace, as the council would probably require his attendance. "Oh dear! I wish this was all over," he said to Ralph, as the latter assisted him to buckle on his armor. "I don't see anything to sigh about," Ralph said. "I think that you are the most fortunate fellow in the world. I do not say that you have not well deserved it, because it is the tremendous way you worked at Turkish and gave up everything else that has enabled you to do this. Still, there was luck in your noticing that villain talking to the galley slaves, and then to one of the officers of the prison. Of course, as the Grand Master said last night, it isn't 1 in 1,000 who would have thought anything more about it, and I am sure I shouldn't, so that, and all the rest, is entirely your own doing. Still, it was a piece of luck that you noticed him talking with a slave. Don't think I envy you, Gervase, I don't a bit, and I feel as much as anyone that you have well deserved the honor you have obtained. Still, you know, it is a sort of consolation to me that luck had a little, just a little, to do with it." "In my opinion luck had everything to do with it," Gervase said heartily, "and I feel downright ashamed at there being such a fuss made over it. It was bad enough before, merely because I had hit on a plan for our escape from those pirates, but this is worse, and I feel horribly nervous at the thought of having to appear before the Grand Master and the Council." "Well, that brown dye will hide your blushes, Gervase. I can only say I wish that I was in your place. By the by, have you heard that they caught that rascal Greek last night?" "No, I have not heard anything about it." "Yes. The knights hid themselves behind a pile of goods on the wharf. There was no one about, so far as they could see, but soon after 12 they saw a figure come up onto the deck of a fishing boat moored by the quay. It was the Greek. He stood there for a minute or two listening, and then went down again. He did this 5 or 6 times, and at 1 o'clock they saw him throw up his arms, as if in despair. He stepped ashore, and was about to make his way up into the town when they rushed out and seized him. There is no doubt as to what his fate will be. I am sorry to say that I hear my friend Vrados has been arrested, but there can be no doubt about his loyalty, and he will assuredly be able to explain to the satisfaction of the council how this man became a resident at his house. I am sorry I met him there, Ralph. It is a very unpleasant thing to have gone to a house, to have been received kindly, and then to be the means of bringing trouble upon it." "Yes. I feel that a little myself, because I took you there, and yet I cannot regret it, for if you had not seen him and taken an objection to him, you might not have noticed him particularly when he spoke to one of the galley slaves. It is certainly curious that you should have doubted the man, for I have met him there several times, and even after your visit with me I could see nothing in him to justify your dislike." Gervase went up to the palace, and while waiting in the great hall until summoned before the council he was warmly accosted by several knights, some of whom were quite strangers to him, who all joined in congratulating him on the immense service he had done to the order. It was upwards of an hour before he was called in. "The council have received Sir Gervase Tresham," the Grand Master said, "full details from Sir John Kendall of the manner in which you first discovered, and have since followed up the daring plot by which the slaves at St. Pelagius were to have risen, slain the guards who were faithful, spiked the cannon in the 3 water forts, burnt the merchant shipping, carried off 6 galleys, and burnt the rest. And in their name I thank you for having saved the order from a great calamity. The members of the council agree with me that you have shown an amount of discernment of the highest kind, and that you are worthy of exceptional favour and reward for your conduct. I therefore in my own name appoint you to the commandery of our manor of Maltby in Lincolnshire, which, having fallen vacant, is in my gift, and I release it from the usual payment of the first year's revenue. Knowing that you desire to establish yourself here, the council have, at my request, decided to make an exception to the general rule that a knight, on promotion to a commandery, must return and take charge of it in 2 years from the time the grant is made to him. The commandery will therefore be administered by the senior of the knights attached to it. The council, on their part, have requested the bailiff of Oven, as Grand Master of the fleet, to appoint you to the command of the galley now building and approaching completion. This he has consented to do, feeling, as we all feel, that although such an appointment is unprecedented for a young knight, yet in the present case such an exception may well be made. I may add that the Admiral has, in order that no knight greatly your senior should be placed under your command, determined that he will appoint to it only young knights, who will, we are assured, gladly serve under one who has so distinguished himself, feeling certain that, under his command, they will have ample opportunities against the infidels to prove themselves worthy of the order. I may add, also, that the bailiffs of all the longs promise that they will select from among the young knights such as may seem best fitted for such service, by their skill in warlike exercises, by their ready obedience to orders, and good conduct. And I foresee that the spirit of emulation, and the desire to show that, though still but professed knights, they are capable of performing as valiant deeds as their elders, will make the galley under your command one of the most successful in the order. As you are aware, it is a stringent rule, which even in so exceptional a case we should not be justified in breaking, that a knight must reside in the island for 5 years previous to being promoted to a commandery. It is now 2 months more than that time since you were received as page to the late Grand Master, and in promoting you to a commandery I have not, therefore, broken the rule. You may retire, Sir Gervase." Gervase, overwhelmed by the unlooked-for honours thus bestowed upon him, bowed deeply to the Grand Master and the members of the council, and then retired from the chamber. He passed out of the palace by a side door, so as to avoid being accosted by the knights in the great hall, and took his way out onto the ramparts, where he walked up and down for a considerable time before returning to the auberge. He felt no hilarity at his promotion. He had never entertained any ambition for rising to high office in the order, but had hoped only to perform his duty as a true knight, to fight against the infidels, and some day, if need be, to die for the order. The commandery was, he knew, a rich one, and as its chief he would draw a considerable revenue from the estate. This afforded him no pleasure whatever, except inasmuch as it would enable him, in his new command of the galley, to keep a handsome table, and to entertain well the knights who served under him. It seemed to him, however, that the reward and honours were so far beyond his deserts that he felt almost humiliated by their bestowal. The responsibility, too, was great. Would these young knights, the youngest of whom could be but a year his junior, serve willingly under his orders? And, above all, would they be able to emulate the deeds of experienced warriors? And would the galley worthily maintain the fame of the order? At the end of 2 hours he was joined by Ralph Harcourt. "I have been looking for you everywhere, Gervase. You seem to have disappeared mysteriously. None had marked you leave the council chamber, or knew where you had gone, and after searching everywhere I remembered your fondness for walks upon the walls, so I climbed to the top of St. John's Tower and thence espied you. Well, I congratulate you most heartily on the honours that have fallen to your share, especially that of the command of a new galley. It is too much altogether, Ralph. I feel ashamed at being thus thrust into a post that ought to be given to a knight of age and experience. How can I expect a number of young knights, of whom well nigh all must be my seniors in age, to obey me as they would an older man? What has age to do with it?" Ralph said, "You have shown that you have a head to think, and, as you before proved, you have an arm to strike. Why, every young knight in the order must feel proud that one of their own age has gained such honor. It raises them all in their own esteem, and you will see that you will get the pick among all the professed knights, and of a good many who have finished their profession, and are serving here in the hope of some day getting promotion to a commandery. Not Chapter 12 The Boy Galley. Among those most pleased at the appointment of Jervis to the command of the galley was Sir John Boswell. Ever since the adventure with the pirates, the knight had exhibited an almost fatherly interest in him, had encouraged him in his studies, ridden with him on such occasions as he had permitted himself a short holiday, and had, whenever they were together, related to him stories of war, sieges, battles, and escapes, from which he thought the young knight might gain lessons for his future guidance. "I doubt, Jervis," he said one day, as they were riding quietly along the road, "whether our plan of life is altogether the best. We were founded, you know, simply as a body of monks, bound to devote ourselves solely to the care of the sick, and to give hospitality to pilgrims in Palestine. Now this was monkish work, and men who devoted themselves solely to such a life of charity as that in our hospital at Jerusalem might well renounce all human pleasures, but when the great change was made by Master Raymond Dupuy, and from a nursing body we became a brotherhood in arms, it seems to me that the vows of celibacy were no longer needful or desirable. The Crusaders were, many of them, married men, but they fought no worse for that. It would have been far better, methinks, had we been converted into an order pledged to resist the infidel, but without the vows of poverty and of celibacy, which have never been seriously regarded. The garrison here might be composed, as indeed it is now, principally of young knights, of those who have not cared to marry, and of the officers of the order whose wives and families might dwell here with them. This would have many advantages. Among others, the presence of so many ladies of rank would have the excellent effect of discountenancing and repressing extravagances and dissolute habits, which are but too common and are a shame to the order. Knights possessing commanderies throughout Europe would be no worse stewards for being married men, and scandals, such as contributed largely to the downfall of the Templars, would be avoided. The sole vow necessary, so far as I can see, would be that knights should remain unmarried and disposable at all times for service until 10 years after making their profession, and that afterwards they should ever be ready to obey the summons to arms on occasions when the safety of Rhodes, or the invasion of any Christian country by the Moslems, rendered their services needful, when they would come out just as the knights of Richard the Lionheart went out as crusaders. I have spent half my life since I joined the order in commanderies at home, and a dull life it was, and I was glad enough to resign my last command and come out here. Had I been able to marry, I might now have had a son of your age, whose career I could watch and feel a pride in. My life would have been far happier in England, and in all respects I should be a better man than I am now. Methinks it would strengthen rather than weaken the order. As a fighting body, we should be in no way inferior to what we are now, and we should be more liked and more respected throughout Europe, for naturally the sight of so many men leading a luxurious life in commanderies causes a feeling against them. But I suppose, Sir John, that there is no great difficulty in obtaining a dispensation from our vows. In this, as in all other matters, everything depends upon interest or money. Of course, dispensations are not common, but doubtless any knight when he had served his term of active service could, especially if his requests were backed by the Grand Master, obtain from the Pope a dispensation of his vows. If he had a commandery it would make a vacancy, and give the Grand Prior, or the Grand Master, or the Council, in whosoever's gift it might be, an opportunity of rewarding services or of gratifying some powerful family. I agree with you that it would have been much better, Sir John. I can understand that monks, ever living a quiet life apart from the world, should be content so to continue, but among a body of warlike knights there must be many who, in time, must come to regret the vows they took when boys. The cadet of a noble family might, by the death of elder brothers, come to be the head of a great family, the ruler over wide domains. Surely it would be desirable that such a man should be able to marry and have heirs. Doubtless it could be managed in such cases, Jervis, but it is a pity that it should have to be managed. I can see no reason in the world why a knight, after doing 10 years of service here, should not be free to marry, providing he takes a vow to render full service to the order whenever called upon to do so. Already the vow of poverty is everywhere broken. Already, in defiance of their oaths, too many knights lead idle and dissolute lives. Already, knights, when in their own countries, disregard the rule that they shall draw sword in no cause save that of the Holy Sepulchre, and, like other knights and nobles, take part in civil strife or foreign wars. All this is a scandal, and it were better by far to do away with all oaths, save that of obedience and willingness to war with the infidel, than to make vows that all men know are constantly and shamelessly broken. I am fond of you, Gervase. I am proud of you, as one who has brought honor to our langue, and who, in time, will bring more honor. I am glad that, so far as there can be between a young knight and one of middle age, there is a friendship between us. But see what greater pleasure it would give to my life were you my son, for whom I could lay by such funds as I could well spare, instead of spending all my appointments on myself, and having neither kith nor kin to give a sigh of regret when the news comes that I have fallen in some engagement with the infidels. I often think of all these things, and sometimes talk them over with comrades, and there are few who do not hold, with me, that it would be far better that we should become a purely military order, like some of the military orders in the courts of the European sovereigns, than remain as we are, half monk, half soldier, a mixture that, so far as I can see, accords but badly with either morality or public repute. However, I see no chance of such a change coming, and we must be content to observe our vows as well as may be, so long as we are willing to remain monks and try to obtain dispensation from our vows should we desire to alter our mode of life. We ought either to have remained monks pure and simple, spending our lives in deeds of charity, a life which suits many men, and against which I should be the last to say anything, or else soldiers pure and simple, as were the Crusaders, who wrested the Holy Sepulchre from the hands of the infidels. At present, Gervase, your vocation lies wholly in the way of fighting, but it may be that the time will come when you may have other aims and ambitions, and when the vows of the order will gall you. I hope not, Sir John, Gervase said earnestly. You are young yet, the knight replied, with an indulgent smile. Some day you may think differently. Now, he went on, changing the subject abruptly, when will your galley be ready? This is my last ride, Sir John. The shipwrights will have finished tomorrow, and the next day we shall take possession of her, and begin to practice, so that each man shall know his duties, and the galley slaves learn to row well, before we have orders to sail. I wish you were going with us, Sir John. I should like it, lad, in many respects. It does one good to see the enthusiasm of young men, and doubtless you will be a merry party. But, on the other hand, unless I mistake, you will be undertaking wild adventures, and my time for these is well nigh past. When the Turk comes here, if he ever comes, and of that I have little doubt, I shall be ready to take my full share of the fighting, but I shall seek adventures no longer, and shall go no more to sea. Next only to the bailiff, I am the senior of our auberge, and, but this is between ourselves, lad, am like to succeed to the Grand Priory of England when it becomes vacant, and if not I shall, as the Grand Master has told me, have the offer of the next high office vacant in the palace. 2 days later Gervase and his company of young knights went down to the port to take part in the launch of the new galley. This was the occasion of a solemn ceremony, the Grand Master and a large number of knights being present. A religious service first took place on her poop, and she was named by the Grand Master the Santa Barbara. When the ceremony was over, Gervase was solemnly invested with the command of the galley by the Grand Marshal of the Navy. Then the shores were struck away, and the galley glided into the water, amid the firing of guns, the blowing of trumpets, and the cheers of the spectators who had gathered at the port to witness the ceremony. The next morning a gang of galley slaves were marched down. A third of these had been drawn from the crews of other galleys, their places being supplied by new hands. The remainder were taken from the men employed on the fortifications. 3 weeks were occupied in teaching the rowers their work and getting them well together. They were a fine crew, for the governor of St. Pelagius, grateful to Gervase for the discovery of the plot, had ordered the overseers to pick out from the various gangs men specially suited by age and strength for the work. The dye by this time had entirely worn off his face, and although his hair was still several shades darker than of old, it differed even more widely from the ebon hue that it had been when he was in prison. Thus, although he recognized 3 or 4 men upon the benches who had been fellow occupants of his cell, he had no fear whatever of their detecting in the commander of the galley their late companion in misfortune. Only a portion of the knights had been out each day while the crew were learning to row, as there was but little for them to learn. The galley carried no sails, and the knights were soldiers rather than sailors, and fought on the deck of their ship as if defending a breach, or storming one held by the enemy. Moreover, as all of them had already made 1 or more voyages, they were accustomed to such duties as they would have to discharge on board. All were glad when an order was published for the galley to sail. On the eve of departure, Gervase was sent for by the Grand Master. The general of the galleys was with him when Gervase entered the room. The bailiff of Oven always held the position of Grand Marshal, and the bailiff of Italy that of second in command, with the title of Grand Admiral. These officials, however, as heads of their "Goodbye, Sir Gervase," the Grand Master said, as the interview terminated. "Hitherto you have given me, from the time you reached the island, naught but reason for satisfaction at my nomination of you as page, and I have no fear that you will fail this time. Remember that valor, however great, cannot prevail against overpowering odds. You had a lesson of that when you served under record, though finally the affair turned out well. I do not say, don't attempt desperate undertakings, but don't attempt impossible ones. Be careful of the lives of your knights. Remember that ere long every sword may be of the utmost consequence in the defense of Rhodes, and that even the capture of pirates may be too dearly purchased, but that, at the same time, the honor of the flag of the order must be upheld at all hazards." "Ah," he broke off, seeing a slight smile on the young knight's face, "you think my orders contradictory? It may be so, but you know what I mean, and I fear not that you will blunder in carrying them out. Be prudent, and yet not over-prudent. I mean, be not rash, unless there are such benefits to be obtained as would justify great risk in obtaining them." On returning to the auberge, Gervase had a long chat with Ralph. "I think the Admiral's talk with us this afternoon had an excellent effect, Gervase. I do not say that every one was not before disposed to obey you in all things, willingly and cheerfully, but he put it so strongly to them that they had volunteered specially for service in this galley, knowing well who was to be its commander, and the circumstance that the crew was to consist solely of young knights, and had therefore specially pledged their honor so to act that the enterprise should be in all respects a successful one. To render it so, obedience was even a greater necessity than valor. This was the most important of all the vows taken by the knights of the order, and it was only by the strictest and most unquestioning obedience on the part of all to the orders of their superiors, that the work of a vast community could be carried on. Passing over the fact that you were their superior in rank, both as being a secular knight and a knight commander of the order, you had been specially appointed by the Grand Master and Council, as well as by himself, and that they bestowed upon you while at sea, and in the absence of any officers of superior rank, their full powers and authority. You were, in fact, their representative and agent, and therefore to be regarded with the same deference and respect that would be due to the oldest knight similarly placed. Lastly, he said, in a less serious tone, you must remember that this is an experiment, and, as some think, a somewhat rash one. Never before did a galley, manned entirely from among the youngest of our knights, put to sea, and you may be sure that, unless successful, the experiment is not likely to be ever repeated. You have been selected from among many other candidates, and you have not only to justify the choice, but to uphold the reputation and honor of the young knights of your order, by all of whom your doings will be regarded with special interest, as reflecting credit not only upon yourselves individually, but as representatives and champions of them all." I could see that his words had a great effect. He had placed me beside him, and I marked their faces as he spoke. Each face lit up at his appeal, and I do not think there was one but silently registered a vow to do all in his power to prove himself worthy of the confidence placed in him, and his companions by the Grand Master and Admiral. I had before no shadow of fear that everything would not go well. I knew almost all of them personally, and if I myself had had the selection from among the whole body of knights in the convent, I could not have made a choice that would have suited me better. It seems to me that in each auberge the bailiff has endeavored to pick out the 7 young knights whom he considered would most worthily support the honor of the langue. Still, confident as I was before, I feel more so now, after the Admiral's address to us. I had no fear either, Ralph, though doubtless the Admiral's words will carry great weight with them. It was thoughtlessness rather than anything else that I dreaded, but now that the Admiral himself has spoken to them, there is no fear that anything will occur to give us trouble. I have particularly noticed that when we have been on board, and have been laughing and chatting together before we got under way, their manner changed directly the first order was given, and that all the commands were carried out with as much goodwill and alacrity as if they were under record himself. On the following morning the knights all went on board the Santa Barbara. Their baggage was carried down by slaves, and by the personal servants from each auberge who were to go as their attendants during the voyage. The Grand Master had advanced Gervase a sum equal to half a year's income of his commandery, and with this he had purchased a stock of the best wines and various other luxuries, to supplement the ration supplied from the funds of the order to knights when at sea. Gervase had to go round early to the admiral to sign the receipt for stores and to receive his final orders in writing. All were, therefore, on board before him and, when he arrived, were drawn up in military order to receive him. Every knight was in full armor, and as, at a word from Ralph, they drew their swords and saluted the young commander, Gervase felt with a thrill of pleasure and of confidence that with such a following he need not fear any encounter with a pirate force, unless in overwhelming numbers. The young knights were all, with the exception only of Ralph Harcourt, between the ages of 17 and 19, and their young faces, free in most cases even from the suspicion of a moustache, looked almost those of boys. But there was no mistaking the ardor and enthusiasm in their faces, and the lack of breadth and weight that years alone would give to them was compensated by skill in their weapons, acquired by long and severe training, and by the activity and tireless energy of youth. "Knights and comrades," Gervase said as, after walking through the double line to the end of the poop, he turned and faced them, "I am proud indeed to command so gallant a body of knights. The success of our expedition depends upon you rather than upon me, and as I feel assured of your warm cooperation, I have no fear as to what the result will be, if Dame Fortune will but favor us by throwing in our way some of those scourges of the sea in search of whom we are about to set out. Many of us have already encountered them, and, fighting side by side with older knights, have borne our share of the work, while those who have not done so will, I am sure, do equally well when the opportunity arrives. We shall not this voyage have the encouragement and confidence inspired by the presence of those who have long and valiantly borne the standard of the order, but, on the other hand, we have to show that we are worthy of the confidence reposed in us, and that the young knights of the order can be trusted to emulate the deeds of those who have rendered the name of the hospital as a terror to the infidel." A shout of approbation greeted the close of his address. Gervase then walked forward to the end of the poop and looked down upon the slaves, who, with their oars out, were awaiting the order to row. "Men," he said in Turkish, "it is my desire that, while it is necessary that you should do your work, your lot shall be no heavier than can be avoided. You will not be taxed beyond your powers, save when the enemy is in sight, or there is supreme need for haste, but then you must be called upon for your utmost exertions. I wish your work to be willing. I abhor the use of the lash, and so long as each man does his fair quota of work, I have given the strictest orders that it shall never be used. I have, at my own cost, made provision that your daily ration shall be improved while under my command. Meat will be served out to you daily, when it can be obtained, and for those of you who hold that the strict tenets of your religion may be relaxed while engaged in such severe labor, a ration of wine will also be served out, and such other indulgences as are compatible with the discipline and safety of the ship will also be granted to you." There was a murmur of gratitude among the slaves. Gervase then gave the order to row, and the galley started on her voyage. The knights had now fallen out from their ranks, and were soon laughing and talking gaily. Being all of noble families and knightly rank, there was, except when on actual duty, a tone of perfect equality and good fellowship prevailing among them. French was the common language, for as the order was of French foundation, and 3 of the 7 longs belonged to that country, most of the high dignitaries being chosen from their ranks, it was natural that the French language should be the general medium of communication between them. Until noon the slaves rowed steadily and well. Work was then stopped, for there was scarce a breath of wind stirring the water. Even under the awning that had, as the sun gained power, been erected over the poop, the heat was oppressive. The knights had all divested themselves of their armor, and most of them retired below for a siesta. As soon as the slaves stopped rowing, an awning, which Gervase had purchased, and which was rolled up under the break of the poop, was, to their astonishment, drawn over them. "Don't you think you are spoiling your slaves, Sir Gervase?" one of the Spanish knights asked doubtfully. "On the contrary, Sir Pedro, I hope that I am improving them. You have not worked as a galley slave, but I have, and I can assure you that I used to feel the hours when we were lying broiling in the sun, doing nothing, much more trying than those during which I was at work. I used to be quite giddy and sick with the heat, and on getting out the oars again had scarce strength to work them. But this is not the most important point. In port the slaves always sleep in the prison, but at sea they must rest on their benches, and to do so with clothes soaked with the heavy dew must be a severe trial, and most prejudicial to the health. The awning cost but a few ducats, and I reckon that, putting aside the comfort to the slaves, it will be very speedily repaid by their better health and capacity for labor. When away in the galley with Sir Louis Record, I used to feel the greatest pity for the unfortunate wretches when at daybreak, in their drenched clothes, and shivering with cold and wet, they rose to commence their work. I then took a vow that if ever I should come to command a galley I would provide an awning for the slaves. 2 or 3 of the knights standing by expressed their warm approval of what Jervis said. There was, in those days, but little of that sentiment